Dr. J. Smith again. I'm answering questions that have come up from the series Fadi and I did on this debate concerning the Qibla, this debate between Dr. David King and Dan Gibson. Now, here's a question that came up by J.R. Qwertz. And he asked this: I found your episodes about the Qibla controversy very interesting. I subtitled to episode 11, you wrote, King concludes his attack against Gibson by saying in all such investigations, no conclusions should be drawn based on actual Qibla directions calculated from modern geographical data using some kind of exact mathematical procedures. Now, while researching for another topic, I found a name for this: Presentism. Presentism, literary and historical analysis. In literary and historical analysis, presentism is the anachronistic introduction of present-day ideas and perspectives into depictions or interpretations of the past. Some modern historians seek to avoid presentism in their work because they consider it a form of cultural bias, and I believe it creates a distorted understanding of their subject matter. The practice of presentism is regarded by some as a common fallacy when writing about the past. J.R. Qwertz, absolutely, and I would say that's a very good word for what we are talking about. But the fact is, I think you're applying this to Gibson's work. Am I correct? See, presentism is a real problem. When you take and you look at past histories, stories, occurrences that happen in archaic lands or archaic places, you then look at that and you find it wrong, but you're using your own moral codes for today, your own categories for today, and imposing that on that which is in the past. That's the problem with presentism. It imposes a cultural view or cultural grid, present day one, and it imposes it onto the past. Let me think. James Missioner, when he did this in his book Hawaii, when he looked and was just absolutely denigrated the missionaries that went to Hawaii first, saying that they put their own clothes on, demanding that the natives wear their kind of dress. That is a sense of presentism. But also, it's fascinating to me because James Missioner also degraded them and denigrated them, saying that this was not right because we now know today we don't do that. Well, that's interesting because he was also, you could say that he was also imposing his views of what we would do today in a cross-cultural environment and imposing it on to what they did then. So that's presentism too. So both cases. Now, to say that Gibson and Fadi and I are doing this, I think is wrong. In this case, we're not doing presentism. We're not taking. It's not that we're taking modern technology and imposing modern technology onto the past. We're asking a very good question, and that is, how can we accurately measure these Qiblas? How does it we know how best to measure them? Now, the fact is, the only way to do that is by using modern technology, is by using very accurate means of measurements, not just speculation. And that's why the Astra satellite is, and their whole equipment that they use, that's what Dan Gibson employed to be able to accurately know exactly where these Qiblas were facing all over the world, even as far away as China. You could only do that if, because with the curvature of the Earth, you would not know where those directions are, unless, of course, you were able to use something as accurate as the Astra satellites. What King has done is to denigrate Gibson for doing this, and said that's why he says we must not use modern geographical data on ancient texts. In sense, he would be the one that's using presentism. I would suggest that it is he that's guilty of this in two ways. First of all, he's guilty of this because he has taken, rather than going to the people that lived in the 6th and 7th and 8th century, which is where he should have gone, because they were the ones that built these mosques. They were the ones that were choosing these Qibla directions, rather than going to them and asking them and trying to understand how they came to their conclusions. He's using much later, 9th, 10th, and 11th century scholars, Muslim scholars by this time, and borrowing their theories, which were, again, just guesses, nothing more than theories, nothing more than that, because they didn't know as well. And then he was assuming because they are Muslims and therefore they're closer to the event than he is, they must be correct. Now, he was taking their theories and imposing it onto 6th, 7th, and 8th century Arabs. Isn't that a good case of presentism? Secondly, he was also assuming that the earlier Qiblas were more inaccurate than the later Qiblas that were facing Mecca. And the reason, he just gave the reason is the same reason that he borrowed from these later scholars, that they now had mathematics in the 9th, 10th, and 11th centuries, whereas they weren't available. This wasn't available in the 6th, 7th, and 8th. So it stands to reason that they had much more accurate Qiblas in the later Meccan Qiblas. Dan Gibson disagreed with that, and that's why Dan Gibson, actually, by going back and actually measuring using modern technology, the very thing the king tells us not to do, and you can see why he's telling us not to do, because he didn't do it. He should have done it. So using modern technology not to impose his views on those Qiblas, but to find out whether those Qiblas were more accurate, he found out that actually the earliest Qiblas to Petra were within about 2 degrees of error. The ones that call the in-between mosques were even less than a degree in error. The ones that were facing parallel, the ones from North Africa and Spain, they were within 3 degrees off. And it was the Meccan mosques, the ones that use mathematics, the king was all belly-hopping about and saying, these are the most accurate, were the least accurate. They were 4.78 degrees of error off. So, fascinating, he was using presentism, the very thing you're talking about, twice. Once by borrowing these later theories and imposing them onto what was happening in the 7th and 8th century, and he was also assuming that the later mathematics was more accurate than using the Qamar block or something as simple as following the stars, as the earlier, we're assuming this is how the earlier ones did. That's how they were able to get it so accurate. That's how they were able to get across the deserts. That's how they were able to get it thousands of miles away when no one else could. So presentism is a real problem, but make sure you're applying presentism to the right group. We are not guilty of presentism. We didn't use any theories or moral code or cultural grid from today and impose it on the 6th, 7th, and 8th century. What Gibson is doing, what I am doing, what Al-Fadi is doing, what we're doing is actually trying to understand how they were able to get these Qibla directions so accurate, how they were able to go thousands of miles and make it and get there to save their lives. And that's why the whole problem with presentism, I would say, is you need to lay at the door of king. And even all these later 9th, 10th, and 11th century Muslim scholars. Good point, though. Thanks for bringing it up. Great to be able to discuss it. Now, give your reaction to it. Let's see what you think about this. All right, then. This is Jay here in my office.